Hello and welcome to Unit 13, Day 1. It's right triangle trig, so mostly it's going to be a review today. What I need from you right now is to grab your calculator and make sure that you go to Mode and have it in degree mode, okay? So just make sure you go to Mode and make sure that it's on degrees, not radians. Otherwise, you won't get any of the correct answers, okay? So we're going to start with the basics, and we're going to look at the opposite and the adjacent and hypotenuse, okay? Before you do anything with this, you need to make sure that you know the difference. So first one I always find is I go to the right angle, and I go straight across from that. This would be your hypotenuse, okay? So go across from the right angle on any right triangle, and that's your hypotenuse. The opposite is whatever angle they tell you. So they gave me this blue angle right here. So if I go directly opposite the angle, that's what we would call the opposite side. And then what's nice about the adjacent side is it's just the one that's left. Okay, so if I go to the second triangle, I go across from the right angle. That's my hypotenuse. I go to the angle they give me, which is this purple angle, go across from that. That's considered the opposite side, and whatever's left is what we call the adjacent side. All right, so you should be familiar with SOHCAHTOA. Its sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse, and cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the last one is tangent, which is the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. So it's a ratio that you're setting up. And I like to write it like this, even though it's one big word, SOHCAHTOA. So let's try a basic example. This one just wants you to give the sine, cosine, tangent, just the ratios, no solving for each of them. So the first thing you need to do is identify the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the right angle. I'm going to go straight across from it. Okay, so that's this 13. That would be the hypotenuse. Then I'm going to go to this symbol right here, means theta. I'm going to go to that angle they give me. It looks like a 0 with a line through it. Go across from that one, which is the 5. That's the opposite side. And then the leftover one is the adjacent side. So if I remember my SOHCAHTOA, sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So the opposite side is 5 over the hypotenuse, which is 13. Cosine is the part of the SOHCAHTOA, which is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So that's 12 over 13. And lastly, tangent is the TOA part, which is the opposite over the adjacent. So that's 5 over 12. Okay. Now we're going to move on to how we use this. We need to be able to solve for missing sides and missing angles. So we're going to start with missing sides. I've already labeled what I have. They give me 53. I go to the right angle, go across, that's my hypotenuse. I go to the 53, go across, that's the opposite side, and the leftover one is the adjacent. So as you can see, I have 4.5 for the adjacent, and they want me to find the opposite. So the two sides I'm working with is the opposite and the adjacent. O and A is the TOA part, so we're going to be working with tangent. When you write a trig ratio, you always put the angle in the trig ratio. So it's tan of a degree. So the angle they give us is 53 degrees. So you start with tan of 53 degrees is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. So that's x over 4.5. So this is what you set up first. Tan of 53 equals x over 4.5. I always put this over 1. And the next step is just going to be to cross multiply. So when I cross this way, I get 45 times the tan of 53, or 4.5, excuse me, not 45, equals, when I cross the other way, I get 1 times x, which is just x. When I go to solve this, I'm simply just going to divide or multiply these two together, so I type it straight in my calculator. Tan of 53, don't forget to close your parenthesis on the end when you type it in, times 4.5, and when you type that in, you should get 5.97, and it's in inches. Okay, pause the video and try this next one on your own. All right, so across from the right angle is our hypotenuse, so that's the 5.6. Across from the 30 degrees is my opposite, so that's x. I'm working with the opposite and the hypotenuse, so that's going to be sine. And I always put the angle inside the trig ratio, so it's sine of 30 degrees. is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, which is x over 5.6. And then to solve this, I put it over 1 and I cross multiply. So when I cross multiply, I get sine of 30 times 5.6 equals 1 times x, which is just x. And I type that straight into my calculator and get 2.8 centimeters. Okay? All right, pause the video and try this next one on your own, and then we'll move on to solving for angles. All right, so across from the right angle is A, which is in my hypotenuse. Across from the 61 is my opposite, and the leftover side is the adjacent. So I have A for the hypotenuse and 4 for the adjacent. So the two sides I'm working with are the adjacent and the hypotenuse. That's the cosine trig ratio. So it's cosine of 61, because that's my angle, is equal to the adjacent, which is 4, over the hypotenuse, which is, oops, I put x, it's a x, whatever, let's change this to x. All right, let's call that x, because I put x when I typed it. My apologies. So I'm going to put it over 1, and I'm going to cross multiply. Now when I cross multiply, this one's not quite as easy as the other ones. I get x times the cosine of 61 equals 4. So if I want to solve for x, I need to get rid of cosine of 61, and I can type that straight into my calculator and get a number. So if I just divide by cosine of 61, these two are gone. But if I divide on this side, I have to divide on the other side. So I get 4 divided by cosine of 61. And now you can type that straight into your calculator. Just type 4 divide cosine of 61, and you get 8.25 centimeters. All right, try the next one. All right, so I'm working with the hypotenuse and the opposite side. That's sine. So sine of 29 equals 6.5 over A. Put it over 1 here and cross multiply. When you cross multiply, you get A times sine of 29 equals 6.5. To solve for A, you need to divide by sine of 29 on both sides. These cross out, so you're left with A equals 13.4 meters. All right, so now we're going to move on to solving for angles, and to do that we need the inverse trig ratio. So the sine to the -1 means sine inverse. It undoes the sine function. Cosine to the -1 is cosine inverse. It undo the cosine function. And tan to the -1 is tan inverse, and that undoes the tangent function. Okay? So we'll see why we need these now. So they tell me to find the measure of angle A. Okay, so they don't give me the angle anymore. I need to find it. So I go across from the right angle, that's the hypotenuse. I don't have anything there, so I'm not going to use it. I go across from angle A, that's my opposite, and the leftover one is the adjacent side. So I'm working with the opposite and the adjacent. That is the, oops, where did I write it? Whoopsie. That is the tangent function. So it's tan of A equals opposite over adjacent, which is 3 over 6. And this is a little bit easier. To get rid of this tan, you just have to use the tangent inverse. So you end up getting A equals tan inverse of 3 over 6. And to use the tan inverse on your calculator, you type second tan, and you should see tan to the -1 come up, and you just type 3 over 6 in there, and it gives you your answer of 26.6 degrees. All right, I pulled up my calculator so I could show you. So you type second tan, and you get tan inverse of 3 divided 6. And type that in. Oops, this is when you forget. Check your mode. Mine's on radians. That decimal does not make sense for an angle. Change it to degree. Second tan of 3 divided 6. And I get 26.6 degrees. Right, pause the video and try this next one on your own. All right, so working with the opposite and the hypotenuse, that is the sine ratio. So I get sine of angle B is equal to 3 over 13. And to undo the sign, I use sine inverse. So b is equal to the sine inverse of 3 over 13. And to type that in, I hit second sine. 3 divided 13. And I get 13.34 degrees for b. All right, so now we're going to move into a couple more application problems and a couple that you just have to set up a little differently. So it says two hikers leave camp. One walks 2.8 kilometers east, the other walks 6.05 kilometers south. What's the distance between them? So I put them starting at this point right here. One walks 2.85 east. The other walks 6.05 kilometers south. They want to know the distance between it. So they want to know this distance right here. Okay, so we have a right triangle, so we're going to use Pythagorean theorem. It doesn't matter which one you call A and B. So I called 2.85A, so I did 2.85 squared. And 6.05 squared I called B equals C squared. And then all I did was type that in my calculator and get 44.725 equals C squared. To get rid of the C squared, you square root. So your final distance is 6.69 kilometers. All right, we have just a few more. So there's some vocab you want to know, and angle of elevation and angle of depression are slightly different. So think of the angle of elevation as you standing on the ground and angling your head upwards to get that. So this person standing on the ground and angling up at a degree of 47 degrees. And the angle of depression, think of yourself standing on a cliff, looking straight out and then angling down until you look at the ground. So the angle of depression is the opposite of the angle of elevation. Angle of depression is right here. Okay, and the angle of elevation is the opposite. Okay, so if I were to draw, if I were this kite, if this kite were a human being and it could look down at the ground, the angle of depression for the kite would be right there. Okay, so the last piece is being able to set up triangles. So they want you to draw a triangle for this problem and then solve. So if you wanted to first, you could solve this. You just cross multiply. And when you solve that, you get 4 times the sine of 52 equals x. You jump to your calculator and type 4 times the sine of 52. And you've already got this problem solved without needing to set up a picture. So that works, but now they want me to set up my picture. So I just went with a generic triangle, okay, and it says sine of 52 degrees. So I picked one of my angles to be 52. Okay, so that's my 52. Sine is the so part of the trig, so it's opposite and the hypotenuse. So this is the hypotenuse, okay, and this is the opposite side. If it's opposite over hypotenuse, the x is my opposite, and the hypotenuse is my 4. And that's the picture for that triangle. We've already solved it, and we're done. So now let's try the next one. This one says draw a triangle and solve. So let's just go ahead and solve first. We're going to cross multiply. Okay, and when we cross multiply, we get cosine of 30 times z equals 8z minus 4. Now what's nice is cosine of 30 is just a number. So I'm going to type cosine of 30 in my calculator. And I get 0.866. So I get z times 0.866 equals 8z minus 4. To solve this, I need to combine my z's. So I subtract 8z from this side and subtract 8z from this side. These are now gone. So I'm left with negative 7.133 equals negative 4. And to get rid of that negative 7.133, I divide it over, and I get my final answer to be z equals 0.56. Now to set up the picture, I just draw a generic triangle. I pick whatever angle I want to be 30, so I picked the same angle in the last picture. Cosine is the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So this is my hypotenuse. This is my adjacent side. So it's adjacent over hypotenuse. So the top part of my fraction is the adjacent side. So this must be 8z minus 4. And the bottom is my hypotenuse. So there would be my picture for that. All right, pause the video for this last one and see if you can set up a triangle that has a sine inverse of 5 over 9. All right, so you can quickly solve it by just typing that in your calculator. You could type second sine of 5 divided 9 and you solve it and get 33.7 degrees, okay? The next piece is to pick one of the angles to be theta. That's the symbol for theta. We don't know the angle, now we know it's 33.7. Sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse, so my opposite side is right here, and it's 5. My hypotenuse is across from the right angle, so it must be 9. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to know for the worksheet. If you need any additional help, go watch the video online or check your answers on the board or on the whiteboard. I will see you tomorrow.